this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Saturn game, and that happens to be a game called, okay, give me a second, Law. Well, that's the original name, where the version that I'm taking a look at is called Law Arcade Gears. So originally it was developed and published by Taito in the arcade, but then it got ported to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, and those ports were being developed by Sing Entertainment, but still published by Taito. And it was even on an obscure console called the FM Towns Marty. And it's also available on Taito Memories Volume 1, which is the Japanese version of Taito Legends. For the most part, all the versions are released in Japan except for the arcade version actually did come out in North America, if you could believe it, and it came out in 1991. But I'm mostly going to be focusing on the Sega Saturn version since this is the one I got working and this one was released in 1997. And it's a really crazy looking beat 'em up in a side-scrolling view. Now, before I continue along and talk about the story, one thing I gotta say right here is that I gotta give a quick shout out to a good friend of mine on YouTube named Xander Scullin from the Excess Gaming Podcast, and the reason why I'm giving him a shout out here is because he did a video on this game quite some time ago, and because of that, that's how I first heard about the game, and I wanted to check it out myself. So anyways, now let's continue right along, and now let's talk about the story. So it takes place in a world called Radish Land. And in this world, time is kept flowing through a time key. But until one day, a bad man appeared and stole the key away to stop the flow of time, and I'm not even kidding, that's actually how it's retranslated as. So Radish Land kinda lost some of its color, and of course everyone is just getting attacked by all these monsters. But in an attempt to save the world of Radish Land, you have two kids named Zach and Mel, and they get a request from an old man who ends up giving them some magical sticks. Yeah, wouldn't it be better if they called it a wand? So anyways, they're just trying to get the time key back so they can save Radish Land and yada yada yada. That's pretty much all you gotta know about the story. And as basic as it is at least very amusing to me, so there's not a whole lot I can say about that. So anyways, now let's talk about the gameplay. So as I said before, it's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. So it's a very simplistic game where basically you just gotta go from one end of the screen to the next and you just gotta beat the shit out of everything you see. And every time you defeat an enemy in this game, an animal pops out, much like in the Sonic games. And just like most beat 'em ups, you do get special attacks, but rather than draining your own health to use them, you actually do get a magic bar. And whenever you use it, it's usually something random each time, and in case you haven't noticed, they're all very over the top and wacky. And there are 6 stages within the game, although there are 7 if you count the final boss, and the levels are pretty short. And now you're probably thinking, well, this game doesn't seem that hard. Well, if you're playing on easy, of course it's not that hard, but if you're playing on normal or higher, this game is very challenging. So as I said before, it's a beat 'em up, so therefore it's very simple and very easy to understand. But just by looking at this game is actually kinda... whoa. Okay, to be serious, this game is batshit fucking insane. But before we get into all that, let's talk about the controls first, and all I have to say here is that they're actually very responsive and very easy to understand. But I do have one minor complaint, and that happens to be that, well, for the most part, the hit detection does work very well, but the only problem is that the hit detection on some of the flying enemies, like the witches, or the Dr. Robotnik looking jellyfishes, I find those two Pacific enemies have very sporadic hit detections where everything else seems to be pretty working order. But other than that, the movement is good, the attacking is not delayed, so it's all good for an essential beat 'em up. So now, let's start talking about the other things, like the graphics, and this is probably the showstopper here because the graphics are very fascinating. So because this game is so what the fooge, there's a lot of things I can talk about here, but let's cover one thing at a time. So when it comes to the art style, it's pretty awesome considering that it's not only hand-drawn, but the animation of it kind of reminds me of a Miyazaki film. So in my books, that right there is pretty damn sweet. Thinking about it now, wouldn't it be awesome if Ghibli Studio got more involved within like arcade-style games? Since it's not the first time that Ghibli Studio has been involved with video games, I mean they've done stuff like Jade Cocoon, Ni no Kuni, and even a PS2 game called Magic Pengal: The Quest for Color, which is ironically enough also developed by Taito. Anyways, I'm getting off topic here, but I just wanted to mention that because that would just be an amazing ass idea. So yes, the art style really does remind me of a Ghibli Studio movie, and the character designs are pretty insane. Now, when it comes to Zack and Mel, they look alright, but everything else is just super crazy, especially the bosses. And there's no real way to describe it other than what the actual fuck. And of course, that is not a bad thing at all, since I do find it to be very outside the box and very creative. And the backgrounds and settings are also very nice looking. So you got the main town, you got a crystallized level, but once you hit level 3, this is where everything turns into the so very, very, very deep dark depths of LSD Dream Emulator. And I'm not even kidding, just look at all this. Yeah, there's just so much stuff I could say right now, but I'll just leave it as it's weird. But one thing that is interesting about this level is that in the North American version of the arcade game, this level was actually censored, and I'm pretty sure you can take a guess what part was censored. It was actually the part with the legs. You gotta wonder what Taito was thinking when they were releasing this game outside of Japan. I'd imagine it'd be like, well team, if we're going to be releasing this to the Western audience, we gotta make sure we gotta change one thing, and that happens to be the part with the legs. But why must we change that, sir? Because our Western audience doesn't really understand our culture. I mean, have you seen it over there recently? They're too busy rotting their brains by watching things like Wayne's World and listening to Nirvana. So, we must change it. But we're gonna leave the guy with the thong in there? They'll never notice. So that's what I would imagine it as. Of course, that's just me being ridiculous, but anyways. The overall graphics in this game are very fascinating, and I really like it a lot. It's very unique, quirky, and just plain out weird. So it kinda sounds like me. So now, as for the music in this game, I think it's pretty decent. Now, it may not be like the most memorable music you'll ever hear in a video game, but I do think it is fairly good. So it does suit the game very well, so of course it is very cheerful and happy sounding and kinda catchy at times. So there's really no complaints I have with the music. I mean, sure it could have been a little bit better, but you know, for what it is, I do think it is pretty good. But I don't know, maybe for an over-the-top game like this, I was kind of expecting like fast-paced hyper music or something. But the music in the game does work fine, so really I don't have any complaints. So now, if you want to buy this game, no matter which version you're getting, this game is pretty expensive. So when it comes to the Saturn game, it usually goes about like 120, 130, and as for the PS1 version, I only found two, and one of them was $70, and the other one was actually more expensive than the Saturn version, so it's kinda hard to tell with that one. And I couldn't find one on the FM Towns or even the arcade version, but I can only imagine that those ones would probably cost more than a used car. But that's just me taking a wild guess on the arcade version. As for the FM Towns, well, I just have no idea. So yet again, we were taking a look at another expensive Saturn import game. And I can only imagine just finding a copy out in the wild would also be pretty hard, especially if you live outside of Japan. So anyways, this game is definitely going to be a really hard one to get a hold of, but if you want to try it out, there is always MAME, the arcade emulator, and there's also the Saturn and PS1 emulators. Now before I say my overall thoughts on the game, I'm going to mention some random trivia about this game. So within the game Bubble Symphony, which is a part of the Bubble Bobble series, some enemies and boss characters and even some settings actually appeared in that game, which is pretty cool. And the character Mel actually appeared in a crossover shooting game called Lion Arkanoid vs Space Invaders for mobile phones. So now, as for my overall thoughts on the game, I really enjoyed this one quite a bit. And as much as I did enjoy this game, it's definitely not nearly as good as such classics like Final Fight or Streets of Rage, but it's still a very fun beat 'em up that can be very challenging at times. So the only real complaint I do have about this game is that the hit detection on some of the enemies can be kinda weird at times, but other than that, it's still very fun and very satisfying. And of course, just the whole style of the game is just so fucking crazy that I just love it a whole lot. In fact, this game is at least worth playing just to see all the crazy shit. So not only is this a very fun game, but this port was actually handled very well. In fact, I think it's almost arcade perfect. So from what I've noticed from looking at the arcade and the Saturn version, just from looking at them, I didn't really notice anything too huge. Now, I'm willing to bet there might be some, like, resolution differences, but honestly, who the fuck cares? So anyways, like I said before, I really enjoyed this game, and of course, if you want to look for a beat-em-up game that is very different, off the wall, or balls to the wall, then I can definitely recommend this game. So overall, Law is a pretty great game that is also very trippy, and also kinda terrifying at times. Maybe I should have included this one in the month of October. So that will be the end of this one, so with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day. P.S. Playing this game while high or intoxicated might be a very euphoric experience.